There is a silence that stretches between worlds, a thin shimmer, like heat on the horizon. You feel it when you wake from a dream and try to remember. You feel it when you stare too long at the sky and something ancient stirs inside you. This is the veil. Not cloth, not metaphor, but a living membrane between what you see and what you are. The veil is not merely illusion, it is separation. It is forgetting. It is the layer placed over your consciousness to keep you from knowing too much, too fast, too deep. But here's the secret. You weren't always veiled. Once, humanity walked in two worlds, eyes open, heart awake. We spoke with stars, we dreamed with trees, we remembered where we came from. The veil did not exist. So what happened? The stories call it the fall, the descent, the shattering. But before we get there, we must understand what the veil truly is. It is the soft barrier between spirit and matter, the distance between your soul's memory and your everyday mind. It is what makes you forget your origin, your purpose, your true nature. It is not evil, it is not punishment, it is function. For to be born into form, into flesh, is to pass through forgetting. Like diving into a deep ocean, you pass through layers of silence, pressure, distortion. You forget the sky above because your body must adapt to water. And in the same way, your soul eternal, limitless forgets, just enough to become human. The veil allows experience. It allows choice. It allows the game of becoming. But something changed. The veil grew thick, too thick. It became more than a tool. It became a prison. You forgot not just the stars, but the fact that you had forgotten. You began to think the world of appearances was all there is, that the mirror told the truth, that the mind was king, that death was the end. The veil had become total. But even in its silence, it leaks. In your dreams, the veil shimmers. In your longing, it trembles. In your deepest heartbreak, in your greatest joy, the veil thins and something comes through. You glimpse yourself, not the name, not the role, but the presence behind the eyes. The ancients knew this. They drew the veil in myth, in ritual, in symbol. They passed on its secrets not through doctrine, but through experience. Because the veil is not removed by belief, it is pierced by awareness. You don't fight it. You don't escape it. You remember through it. And when you do, the illusion begins to flicker. Light shines from behind the curtain. The dream begins to unravel, and you feel it again, that old knowing. You were never just this. You were always more. Before the forgetting, there was a time when humanity lived with eyes wide open. Not eyes that merely looked, but eyes that saw the layers, the fields of energy behind the tree, the ancestors moving behind the wind, the song behind the thunder. This was not myth. This was memory. The world before the veil was not a utopia, but it was awake. Every step on earth was a conversation. Every movement of the stars was a message. Every breath held meaning. We lived not as isolated egos, but as expressions of a great web woven through dream, light, vibration. The animals were not lesser. The plants were not inert. The sky was not mute. Everything was alive. Everything was listening. And so were we. In the temples of Lemuria, it is said, the priests did not worship gods, they communed with them. Their language was vibration. Their offerings were frequencies. Their memories were intact. In Atlantis, knowledge flowed directly from source, channeled through crystalline architecture, aligned with the geometry of the stars. There was no need for scripture. Truth was felt in the bones, seen in the light that surrounded every being. Even later, in Egypt, echoes remained. The Eye of Ra was not just symbol, it was remembrance. The third eye open, the inner sight still awake. The gods walked among men not because they descended, but because the veil had not yet closed. In those days, birth was known to be a sacred re-entry, not a beginning. Children remembered. They spoke of stars, of other lives, of spirits, and they were not silenced. They were guided. Death, too, was not feared. It was understood as transition, not erasure. The soul simply shed one form for another, like a snake moving through lifetimes. There were no atheists, not because of dogma, but because divinity was undeniable. It shimmered in the air. It spoke in dreams. It walked beside you. To eat was ritual. To sing was invocation. To touch another human being was to exchange light. This is the world that once was and still is, hidden behind the fog. The world before the veil was not less real. It was more vivid, more present, more connected. And somewhere inside you, that world still lives. You feel it when you hear music that doesn't belong to this time, when you meet someone for the first time and remember them, when nature overwhelms you and you cry without knowing why. These are the ripples, the fragments of a time when nothing was separate, when you didn't need to seek truth because you were truth. But that time was not meant to last forever. A shift was coming, and with it, the closing of the eyes, the fall, the forgetting, the veil. It didn't happen all at once. The veil did not drop like a curtain, it thickened slowly, like mist creeping in over sacred ground, one lifetime at a time, one silence at a time, one forgotten dream at a time. There was a moment in the soul's history, not just yours, but all of ours, when something broke. A separation, a great division in the fabric of knowing. Ancient traditions speak of this moment with different names: the fall, the shattering, the exile from Eden, the flood that covered the truth, the tower struck down by pride. These stories are not literal. They are symbolic accounts of an inner collapse, a shift not just in civilization, but in consciousness. We went from unity to duality, from communion to control, from the song of the cosmos to the static of the ego. Some say it was a cosmic choice. Others say it was manipulation, a force that wanted humanity asleep. Maybe it was both. But the result was the same. The inner eye began to close, and with it the memory of who we truly are. We no longer remembered the stars we came from, the agreements our souls made before birth, the ancient light that lives in our bones. Instead, we began to identify with the temporary, with the name, with the role, with the mask. We forgot that the body is a garment. We forgot that the mind is a tool. We forgot that death is not the end. The veil thickened. The inner world, once vivid, became imagination. The dreams, once prophetic, became nonsense. The child's knowing was labeled fantasy. The mystic's vision, madness. And so we forgot. Forgot that we are more than the voice in our heads. Forgot that time is not a straight line. Forgot that we once stood face to face with the divine, not as worshipers, but as reflections. And with that forgetting came fear. Fear of death, fear of silence, fear of the unknown, fear of ourselves. Because what we had forgotten still lived within us, and it haunted the corners of our awareness like a half-remembered dream. Civilizations rose on this amnesia, systems built on the illusion that you are small, separate, alone. They taught you to look outward, to find purpose in approval, to measure truth by consensus. And all the while, the soul whispered beneath the veil, You are not what they told you. You are not your story. You are not asleep just dreaming. This is the great fall, not from grace, but from remembrance. And now, something in you is beginning to rise again, a light behind the mist, a stirring behind the mask, a truth so ancient it can only be called home. After the fall, the forgetting could have faded. The soul does not surrender easily. Memory burns even beneath the ash, but something ensured the veil would hold. It wasn't just time that deepened the sleep, it was architecture, it was systems, it was design. Because the veil, once formed, was maintained not just by accident, but by intention. Empires understood that a human who remembers their divine nature cannot be ruled. You cannot enslave someone who knows they are eternal. You cannot manipulate someone who speaks directly to the source. So the veil became sacred to those who needed control. And so they built around it. Religion twisted inward, no longer a bridge to the divine, but a gate with keepers. You were told that God was above you, outside you, accessible only through intermediaries, rituals you didn't understand, and rules you could never fully follow. You were taught to fear the divine, to obey, not to remember, to kneel, not to awaken. Schools taught facts without wisdom, systems that measure intellect but ignore spirit, creativity reduced to curriculum, intuition replaced by repetition, the heart silenced, the imagination dulled, the inner world dismissed as fantasy. And language itself became a tool of forgetting. Words reshaped reality. Mystical experiences were renamed hallucinations. Reverence became weakness. The sacred became superstition. You learn to speak in fragments, to name only what can be measured, to describe life as function, not as mystery. But perhaps the most powerful tool to maintain the veil was identity. From the moment you were born, you were told who you are. A name, a gender, a role, a nationality, a lineage of limitation. And you believed it, because everyone around you had done the same. You inherited the veil from your parents, who inherited it from theirs. Not out of malice, out of survival. Because to live behind the veil is to feel safe, contained, predictable. But safe is not true, and predictable is not awake. And so the world kept spinning faster and faster, louder and louder, drowning out the still voice that might have whispered, "You are more." The veil was maintained not just by force, but by forgetting, by busyness, by distraction, by fear of what might be remembered. Because if the veil lifts, everything changes. The systems fall apart, the illusion collapses, the masks are removed, and in their place is light, silence, truth. That is why the veil was built to endure, because one awakened soul becomes a mirror, and mirrors are contagious. But even the thickest veil cannot last forever. It pulses at the edges, it flickers in the dream, and it cannot hide the cracks forever. Because within you lives something the veil can never touch. A memory older than words, a knowing deeper than thought, a presence that waits patiently for the moment you choose to see. No matter how thick the veil becomes, it cannot seal the soul forever. There are moments small, fleeting, infinite, when the boundary softens, when the mist parts, when something ancient shines through the cracks in ordinary life. You felt it, the strange stillness in the middle of the night, when silence feels like someone is listening, the weightless pause just before waking, when dreams are more real than memory, the sudden chill on your skin when you remember something you've never lived. These are the moments when the veil thins. Sometimes it happens in love, the kind that strips you bare, that silences time, that makes you forget where one body ends and another begins. In that moment, you remember connection, not as concept, but as being. Sometimes it happens in grief raw, cracking, hollowing, a death, a loss, a goodbye so deep that your soul steps forward to carry you through. And for one breathless second, you feel the presence of something greater, not outside you, but you, unveiled. It happens in nature, the hush before the storm, the ancient eyes of a tree, the endlessness of the stars, the wind that moves through you as if it remembers your name. In those moments, the veil lifts, and you remember you are not separate, you never were. It thins in dreams. Dreams where you fly, where the dead speak, where symbols emerge that you understand without learning. These are not illusions. They are messages from the other side of the veil, from the part of you that never forgot. It thins through music, a song that shatters you, a chord that opens a memory, a voice that feels like home. Because sound is older than words, and when it's true, it echoes beyond the veil. It thins in meditation, in dance, in breath, in ritual. The ancients knew this. They created practices to open the gateways, to part the curtain, not forever, but long enough to remember. But sometimes it thins without warning. Déjà vu, synchronicity, that impossible knowing you can't explain. A child saying something that startles your soul awake, a place you've never been that you recognize. These are the reminders that the dream is not all there is, that your soul is still speaking, that the veil may cover, but it cannot erase. Because the veil is not solid. It is breath, it is belief, it is agreement. And in these sacred moments when time stops and truth glows through, the agreement breaks, and for one heartbeat, you see clearly, not with your eyes, but with the part of you that never closed them. Even when the veil grew thick, humanity did not forget completely. We could no longer see the whole, but we remembered fragments, echoes, signs. And so we carved them into stone, painted them on walls, wove them into stories, wore them on our bodies. We carried them like lanterns through the fog, symbols that did not explain the truth, but pointed to it. Because some truths cannot be spoken, they must be felt, lived, remembered. A mirror, a mask, a spiral, a veil, the moon, the eye that sees within. All these are more than metaphor. They are keys, clues scattered throughout time, planted by those who walked the edge of forgetting and dared to look beyond. The mirror was never just glass. It was the reminder that what you see is not all there is, that behind the reflection is a deeper reality, a secret, a self unbound by flesh. The mask, used in ritual, was not to hide, but to reveal, to silence the constructed personality and allow the archetype to emerge, to become the ancestor, the god, the spirit. To wear the mask was to step behind the veil and return with new eyes. The spiral appears in every ancient culture, carved into megaliths, tattooed onto flesh, painted onto burial urns. It is not decorative. It is the memory of movement inward and outward, the path of descent and return, the shape of consciousness remembering itself. The moon, waxing and waning, forever cycling, became the symbol of mystery, of hidden truths, of that which governs life from behind the scenes. It was worshipped not as a god, but as a gateway, a luminous crack in the night sky reminding us that darkness too is sacred. The third eye, etched on foreheads and temple walls, was the map home, a symbol not of vision but of sight, the ability to see without seeing, to know without learning. And then there was the veil itself, represented in temples and texts as a curtain, a boundary, a fabric between realms. In Egypt, it was the shroud of Isis. In Greece, the mystery schools spoke of it as the boundary between the initiated and the uninitiated. In Eastern thought, it became Maya, the illusion that hides the real. But the wise never said, "Destroy the veil." They said, "Pierce it, walk through it, and come back knowing." Symbols are living bridges. They are not meant to be solved like puzzles. They are meant to be entered like doors. To contemplate a true symbol is to stand before the veil and feel it move. This is why ancient symbols still resonate, even when we don't understand them, because your soul does. It remembers. And the moment you encounter one that is meant for you, something stirs, something opens. Because symbols are not decoration, they are activation. And when they find you, you are already standing at the edge of forgetting, ready to remember. There is no map for the way back, because the path beyond the veil is not outward, it is inward. It does not lead to a place, but to a state, not to new knowledge, but to forgotten knowing, not to someone else's truth, but to the one that has always lived inside you, silent, waiting, eternal. To lift the veil is not to learn, it is to unlearn, to dissolve everything that was layered over the soul, belief by belief, fear by fear, word by word, until only presence remains. This is the great paradox. You do not become who you truly are, you remove what you are not. And that is the true work of awakening. It begins in stillness, not the kind forced by silence, but the kind that arises when the mind no longer shouts over the whisper of the soul. In that stillness, you begin to see the false self, the persona you've worn for a lifetime, the name, the mask, the voice that says, "I am this, I am that." And slowly, gently, you begin to let it go. Meditation is one door, not as escape, but as descent into the deep cave beneath identity. Shadow work is another, to face the parts of yourself buried in the dark, not to destroy them, but to reclaim them. Because every part of you you've rejected holds a piece of the key. Ritual helps too, not in grand gestures, but in sacred intention. To light a candle and speak with honesty, to sit with your breath like an old friend, to ask questions no one can answer for you. You begin to notice the illusions. That success does not fulfill, that noise does not satisfy, that truth is quieter than you expected and more beautiful than you were told. As the inner work deepens, the outer world begins to change. Synchronicities arise, dreams become vivid. You meet souls who remember something too. The veil ripples. And then, a moment. It may come in stillness, or pain, or awe. A sudden recognition. You are not your story. You are not your fear. You are not even your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them all, the one who watches, the one who remembers. In that moment, the veil lifts not entirely, but enough. Enough to glimpse the light behind the form. Enough to feel your soul stretch through time like a thread of golden memory. And in that glimpse, something changes forever. You cannot go back, not really. Because now you've tasted truth. And truth, once touched, will pull you home. The path is not easy. It asks for everything. Your certainty, your masks, your willingness to walk alone in the dark. But what it gives in return is beyond words. It gives you back to yourself. Not the version shaped by the world, but the one that existed before the forgetting. And in that self, the veil no longer holds. The great illusion was not that the veil existed, it was that it divided you. But separation was never real. Yes, the world grew silent. Yes, your memory faded. Yes, the voice of your soul was buried beneath noise, fear, and forgetting. But you were never lost. You were dreaming. A long and beautiful dream of being small, of being human, of walking alone. The veil made it convincing. You forgot the vastness behind your eyes. You believed the mirror. You took the story for the self. And still, beneath it all, you remained. Unbroken, unbound, untouched by the forgetting. The soul waits patiently. It does not force, it does not grieve. It watches you fall in love with form, the texture of skin, the thrill of fear, the sweetness of sorrow. It allows you to play, to build, to break, to seek. Because all seeking leads home. Even the longest detour. Even the darkest night. And when you finally look up, tired, hungry, cracked open by time, you realize something unspeakable. You never left. The divine you sought outside was always within. The truth you searched for in books was always in your breath. The love you longed for waited beneath your name, beneath your wounds, beneath your face. The veil was not a wall, it was a teaching. Not to blind you, but to awaken you through contrast. Not to punish, but to prepare. For what is more powerful, a being who has always known the light, or one who lost it and chose to remember? This is the myth of humanity, not a fall from grace, but a descent into form, into forgetting, into shadow, so that remembrance could become real, so that awakening would be earned, not given. And now, here you are, reading these words, feeling something stir, not learning, but remembering, that you are not broken, not separate, not bound. You are the one who walks behind the mask, the voice behind the thought, the light behind the eyes. And no veil can hide you from yourself forever, because the truth is patient, and you are the truth. You always have been, you always will be. Now the only question is, are you ready to wake up?